While you watch this, a tiny crystal buried deep inside your brain is silently pulsing with light, real light, measurable in photons. The ancients called it the Eye of Horus. Modern science calls it the pineal gland. Every culture that ever sought enlightenment pointed to this single structure. Yet today, fluoride, frequencies, and fear are numbing it into dormancy. Egyptian initiates built entire mystery schools to awaken it. Descartes called it the seat of the soul. Secret orders guard its activation rights even now. But here's the part they never wanted you to discover. This gland isn't just an organ, it's a transmitter. It connects your biology to cosmic intelligence itself. And if you've ever felt drawn to hidden knowledge, impossible synchronicities, or vivid inner visions, that signal is already turning back on. Because the story of the pineal gland isn't ancient history, it's the map of your own awakening. Right now, inside your brain, smaller than a grain of rice, rests a luminous organ that ancient mystics described as the eye of God looking out from within you. It sits between the hemispheres, precisely where the energy channels of the body intersect, suspended like a secret jewel in the temple of your skull. Modern anatomy calls it the pineal gland. But the ancients had another name for it, the divine eye, the eye of Horus, the ajna, the third eye. Every civilization that sought higher consciousness left symbols pointing to this single structure. In Egyptian carvings, you can see it openly displayed. The eye of Horus perfectly matches the cross-section of your brain, its curves aligning with the thalamus, its tear line following the corpus callosum, its pupil positioned exactly where your pineal gland rests. Thousands of years later, the Greeks would call this same organ the epiphysis, believing it mediated between mortal perception and divine reason. Philosophers whispered that within this tiny gland, the soul tethered itself to the body, a luminous bridge between spirit and matter. When you stand inside the Great Pyramid, surrounded by angles that mirror the proportions of the golden ratio, you're stepping into an ancient machine designed for pineal resonance. Initiates were placed in sarcophagus-like chambers, deprived of light for days. In absolute darkness, the pineal begins to secrete trace amounts of compounds that shift perception inward. What the Egyptians called opening the eye of Ra was not metaphorical. It was biological initiation. Travel east, and the same mystery repeats. Yogic scriptures speak of the Ajna chakra, a vortex of energy at the brow that governs insight and intuition. Its seed sound ohm vibrates precisely at frequencies that stimulate the midbrain. Buddhist adepts call it the eye of wisdom. Taoist masters describe it as the cinnabar field of heaven. None of these traditions communicated directly across continents, yet they all map the same internal doorway. Why? Because they were describing an experience every awakened human eventually encounters, the moment consciousness realizes it can perceive itself. The pineal gland is the biological antenna that makes this self-perception possible. As humanity spread across the world, the symbol followed. In Sumer, it appeared as the pine cone held by the god Dumuzi, representing eternal life. In Greece, Dionysus carried a staff tipped with the same pine cone, a token of ecstasy and revelation. In Rome, that symbol crowned the Temple of Isis, then migrated through centuries until it resurfaced in the heart of the Vatican as the Fontana della Pigna, the largest bronze pine cone ever cast. Standing before it, you can feel the echo of forgotten teachings, hiding in plain sight. You might wonder why every empire preserved the same emblem but silenced the meaning. The answer lies in control. If the pineal gland truly is the organ of connection between worlds, between you and the divine, then awakening it grants independence from any external authority. Those who rule through fear cannot tolerate subjects who perceive truth directly. So the knowledge was buried beneath ritual, myth, and metaphor, surviving only in initiatory orders and esoteric texts. Yet traces of the original science remained. The Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, wasn't abstract poetry, it described resonance. The macrocosm of the heavens mirrors the microcosm of your inner architecture. Just as the sun illumines the solar system, The pineal gland illumines the inner world. When it's active, you experience lucidity, intuition, and direct communion with higher intelligence. When it's dormant, life feels flat, mechanical, disconnected. Every mystic understood that light is the key. The pineal responds to cycles of darkness and illumination, translating photons into hormonal signals that regulate your entire circadian rhythm. At dawn, light enters your eyes and tells the pineal to cease melatonin production, awakening your body. But beyond ordinary sight lies the ancient secret. The pineal can also generate light internally. Under certain conditions, deep meditation, sensory deprivation, or intense prayer, it emits measurable photons known as biophotons. Modern science barely acknowledges this, yet sensitive instruments confirm it. You are literally a being of light, and your pineal is the switch. Throughout history, those who learned to activate that inner radiance were called seers, prophets, or enlightened ones. Their halos weren't symbolic, they were depictions of electromagnetic fields generated when the pineal's crystalline core vibrated in coherence with the heart and brain. This luminous state, once common among initiates, gradually vanished as humanity turned its attention outward, exchanging inner vision for external technology. But the blueprint of awakening never disappeared. Hidden in architecture, language, and ritual, it awaited rediscovery. Look closely at medieval cathedrals. Stained glass roses radiate patterns identical to pineal microtubule structures. The builders knew. Their cathedrals were stone maps of human anatomy, resonant chambers designed to reawaken the inner light through sound and geometry. Gregorian chants, tuned to natural harmonics, vibrated the skull at frequencies that gently stimulated the pineal gland, inducing altered states of devotion mistaken for divine visitation. Somewhere along the line, that knowledge was deemed dangerous. Institutions replaced direct experience with doctrine. Instead of teaching people to see God within, they taught them to seek salvation without. The pineal, the original temple, was forgotten. Yet you, listening now, are part of the generation rediscovering it. The signs are everywhere. People spontaneously awakening psychic perception, vivid dreams returning, intuitive downloads increasing. This isn't random. The planetary magnetic field, solar radiation, and human brainwaves are all synchronizing at frequencies that favor pineal activation. The ancient prophecies spoke of this cycle, a time when the eye would open again across humanity. And as that eye begins to open within you, you start remembering truths that no book can teach. You realize that the organ of enlightenment isn't external, it's pulsing inside your skull, waiting for recognition. When you close your eyes and picture that tiny light at the center of your head, you're touching a symbol that humanity has carried for millennia. No microscope or telescope was needed, only the feeling that somewhere within, a spark of awareness glowed on its own. Every culture gave that inner spark a name. They carved it into stone, wrote it into hymns, and built temples to echo its form. The pineal gland became their metaphor for awakening. In the Sanskrit world, seers spoke of Bindu, the drop of brilliance that sits between thought and silence. The Vedas describe it as the seed of perception, the point where mortal sight turns inward. When yogis meditated on the space between the eyebrows, they weren't thinking about hormones or glands. They were exploring the meeting place of vision and imagination and inner sky. The same idea shimmered in Greece, where philosophers compared the human mind to a miniature cosmos. Plato's allegory of the cave hinted at it. Humanity staring at shadows, waiting to turn toward the light already burning within. Across oceans, the pattern repeated. The Mayans etched a single eye at the top of their pyramids to mark the spot where heaven touches earth. Norse sagas spoke of Odin trading an eye for wisdom, a mythic exchange that mirrors the inner journey. You give up ordinary sight to gain inner sight. Egyptian priests drew the Eye of Horus on amulets not merely for protection, but to remind the wearer of perception's divine origin. Every myth pointed toward one lesson. Consciousness itself is the treasure. The eye was never a literal organ. It was a teaching device. a reminder that reality is filtered through awareness. The pineal gland, hidden at the brain's center, provided a perfect metaphor for that secret location of knowing. As centuries passed, mystics began linking this inner light with celestial order. Astrologers mapped planets to body parts, assigning the sun to the heart, the moon to the brain, and the hidden star to the pineal. In Hermetic diagrams, rays from the heavens descend through the crown and converge at that central point, suggesting that insight is a miniature sunrise inside each person. Alchemists later transformed this imagery into their great work, turning lead into gold, or more accurately, turning ignorance into illumination. Cathedral architects preserved the concept through geometry. Step into an old European church, and you'll notice how light funnels through a single stained window, scattering color across stone. The faithful believed that divine wisdom traveled the same path, entering through the eye, refracted by the soul. Medieval artists painted saints with radiant halos to visualize that internal dawn. Whether they knew about glands or not, they understood that enlightenment was an experience of seeing with something deeper than eyes. During the Renaissance, curiosity about anatomy merged with mystical speculation. Leonardo da Vinci dissected the human head, searching for the place where vision met thought. His sketches point exactly to the pineal region. Philosophers of that era described it as the throne of reason, or the mirror of the soul. Later, René Descartes would famously call it the seat of the soul, not because he could prove it, but because he sensed that in the brain's hidden center, there must be a meeting point between body and mind. His idea bridged faith and science at a time when both were learning to coexist. By the Age of Enlightenment, literalism began to eclipse metaphor. The gland was studied as tissue, not temple. Still, poets refused to let go of its mystery. William Blake wrote of a single vision that imprisons man, and a double vision that frees him, language that echoes the ancient teaching of two eyes for the outer world and one for the inner. Romantic thinkers saw imagination as the modern form of revelation. The third eye became a poetic shorthand for creativity itself. Through all these transformations, the pineal symbol survived because it solved a timeless riddle. How can something as fragile as a human being sense infinity? By locating the answer within, cultures granted every person access to the sacred. The eye in the pyramid, the halo, the brown jewel, they all whisper the same promise. You carry the doorway. When you look at that continuity, you begin to realize that humanity has always used stories to translate experiences that words can't hold. The pineal gland became the stage on which the drama of consciousness played out. The actors changed priests, philosophers, scientists, but the set remained the same. A light within darkness, a witness behind the eyes. Today, when people speak of activating the pineal, they often mean reawakening that symbolic awareness, remembering to look inward as well as outward. Meditation, art, music, and silence all serve the same function that temple rituals once did. They focus attention until perception turns upon itself. The effect may feel mystical, but it is also psychological. In those moments, the noise of daily life fades, and what remains is the quiet observer that has been watching all along. Imagine standing at twilight, eyes closed, aware of the faint glow behind your eyelids. You're not seeing light, yet something luminous is there. That feeling, the meeting of darkness and radiance, is what the ancients tried to describe. It's what the pineal symbol has carried through centuries of myth. The conviction that within every person is a lamp waiting to be remembered. And so the story moves from temples and scriptures into the present. Science will soon re-enter the scene, not to disprove the mystery, but to reframe it in new language. The next chapter will trace how modern thinkers, neuroscientists, and philosophers have tried once again to understand why this tiny structure fascinates us, why, after thousands of years, humanity still feels that somewhere behind the eyes lies the key to its own awakening. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world that once spoke in hieroglyphs and hymns had traded temples for laboratories. Yet the same question lingered. What is the spark behind consciousness? The pineal gland, long treated as metaphor, re-entered the conversation this time under the lens of science. Researchers found a real organ where myth had placed an inner sun, and that discovery reignited both curiosity and caution. When you read the early physiological studies, you can feel the echo of older wonder. Scientists described a small, light-sensitive gland shaped like a tiny pine cone, connected to the rhythms of day and night. Its biological role regulating sleep, aging, and circadian cycles sounded almost poetic. A keeper of time hidden in the brain. The fact that light still governed it seemed to vindicate the ancients who had linked inner sight with illumination. Writers outside the lab seized the parallel. In the 1940 seconds and 50 seconds, mystics reinterpreted the new findings through the lens of perennial philosophy. They claimed that biology and spirituality were finally speaking the same language. The phrase third eye returned to public vocabulary, now carrying both mystic and psychological weight. Some saw it as a doorway to transcendence, others as a metaphor for intuition, creativity, and expanded perception. Either way, the symbol had adapted once again to the age's instruments. What makes this symbol so resilient is its double life. To a physiologist, the pineal gland is a regulator of rhythm. To a poet, it is rhythm itself, the pulse of awareness moving through the body of time. You can see this tension in modern art and cinema. Eyes drawn in triangles, characters awakening to deeper realities. Light bursting through foreheads as a shorthand for enlightenment. The language of myth quietly merged with the language of neurons. Meanwhile, psychology began exploring consciousness from within. Carl Jung's idea of the inner eye or imaginative vision sounded eerily familiar to the yogic ajna and the Hermetic eye of Horus. Jung argued that symbolic images are not fantasies, but bridges between the conscious and the unconscious. Through dream, art, and meditation, the psyche speaks in pictures, the same kind of pictures ancient mystics carved into stone. The pineal myth thus found new ground, the human mind itself. When you meditate today or pause to watch your own thoughts, you're reenacting an ancient ritual stripped of its robes. You sit in darkness, turn awareness inward, and wait for a flicker of insight. That act, simple, repeatable, entirely human, is what every tradition meant by opening the eye. It's less about supernatural vision than about noticing that perception has layers. There's the world outside, the world of memory inside, and a subtle vantage point between them that quietly observes both. Modern contemplative science studies this vantage point through brain imaging. When people meditate, regions around the pineal and surrounding midbrain show rhythmic activity changes tied to relaxation and focus. For some, that data demystifies the old symbol. For others, it deepens it. Either way, the conversation between myth and measurement continues, each side translating the other's language. The broader lesson remains unchanged. Human beings have always sought a unifying point where matter meets meaning. Whether you call it a gland, a chakra, or a metaphor, the pineal stands for that meeting. It invites you to balance logic with wonder, light with shadow, the seen with the unseen. In practical life, this balance appears as clarity moments when intuition aligns with reason, when a decision feels both rational and right. That is the eye-opening, not as miracle, but as coherence. Pause for a moment and imagine how many generations have looked toward the sky asking for revelation, only to find the answer reflected inward. That motion from horizon to heart is the true orbit of the pineal myth. It teaches that knowledge and self-knowledge are not separate pursuits. The astronomer charting stars and the monk watching breath are tracing the same geometry, a circle that begins and ends within awareness. So when you hear people speak of the pineal gland with reverence or skepticism, remember that both are participating in the same human story, the story of trying to see more clearly. Myths keep the mystery alive. Science keeps the questions honest. Between them lies the real work. Learning to perceive without illusion, to notice light wherever it appears, whether in the heavens, the laboratory, or the quiet of your own mind. As this first chapter closes, the ancient and the modern stand side by side. One speaks in chants and symbols, the other in data and diagrams. Yet both point toward the same horizon of awareness. The pineal gland, once a divine eye, now serves as a reminder of continuity, the way humanity continually rediscovers itself through new languages. And that continuity leads us forward. The next stage of the story asks what this symbol means for us now, how contemporary seekers, scientists, and spiritualists interpret it, and why the fascination endures in an age of artificial light and constant distraction. Because every time you look inward amid the glare of modern life, you repeat the oldest ritual on Earth, the search for the inner Sunday. By the 20th century, humankind had mapped the continents, split the atom, and photographed the far side of the moon. Yet the same mystery that stirred the priests of Egypt and the poets of Greece remained unsolved. What is the source of perception itself? The telescope and the microscope had stretched vision to its limits, but the gaze had not yet turned fully inward. You live in that inheritance. Every screen, every glowing device, every line of code is a monument to the outer eye, the eye that measures, compares, consumes. But alongside this outward explosion of light, another movement quietly began. People returning to meditation, breathwork, and stillness, rediscovering the inner eye their ancestors once described. The language changed, no longer esoteric initiation, but mindfulness, neuroplasticity, flow. Still, the goal was the same, to reconnect the machinery of thought with the mystery of being aware. When scientists in the mid-1900s studied sleep and circadian rhythm, they noticed a pattern that felt strangely mythic. Deep in the brain, the pineal gland released a hormone that told the body when to rest and when to wake. Light and darkness shaped its rhythm. The discovery resonated like an echo from the past. The ancient eye of light was, in a literal sense, a regulator of light. Researchers named the hormone melatonin, and a new chapter began, one where myth and physiology overlapped without canceling each other. For philosophers, this overlap was poetic proof that science and spirituality were two dialects describing one phenomenon. For scientists, it was a reminder that the body still held uncharted mysteries. And for you, standing in the present, it's an invitation to read both languages fluently, to see data and metaphor as partners rather than enemies. Walk through any city at night and notice how artificial light floods everything. The sky no longer darkens enough for the stars to be seen. Some researchers call this the light paradox. Humanity conquered darkness, but in doing so, dulled its natural rhythms. The pineal gland, our internal chronometer, responds to the constant glow by losing its precise sense of night and day. Metaphorically, that imbalance mirrors the spiritual one. We're illuminated but restless, informed but unsatisfied. The outer sun never sets, yet the inner sun struggles to rise. This is why modern seekers talk about decoding the pineal, not as unlocking supernatural powers, but as restoring harmony. They mean learning again the rhythm between stimulus and silence, between doing and being. Meditation has become the contemporary ritual for this restoration. Neuroscientists record its effects: lowered stress hormones, synchronized brainwaves, improved emotional regulation. Practitioners describe it in older words: stillness, clarity, light. When you sit in silence, eyes closed, you become both subject and object of perception, the ancient temple rebuilt inside a quiet mind. Artists, too, have turned to this symbol. Painters depict figures with luminous brows. Filmmakers portray characters waking up from virtual realities. Musicians compose pieces named after the third eye or the inner light. These are not coincidences. They are the collective imagination remembering itself. In an age where information multiplies by the second, the pineal myth offers an antidote: the idea that wisdom still requires an inward gaze. Psychology has given that gaze new vocabulary. Terms like metacognition, thinking about thinking, or the observer effect in quantum physics echo the old intuition that awareness changes what it sees. When you notice your own thoughts instead of being ruled by them, you practice the same principle mystics once described as awakening. The pineal becomes a metaphor for that self-observing faculty, the still point that witnesses motion without being swept away. Consider how culture cycles between extremes. Moments of frenetic progress followed by eras of reflection. The 1960 seconds, with its fascination for altered states and Eastern philosophy, revived the third eye metaphor for a new generation. The symbol appeared on album covers, meditation manuals, protest posters. Behind the aesthetics lay a serious question. If external technology can expand power, can inner technology expand consciousness? Decades later, neuroscience and mindfulness research are still exploring that frontier with more restraint but equal curiosity. For you, living in this era, the challenge is integration. You carry a phone that delivers the sum of human knowledge, yet that same device can scatter attention into fragments. The eye that ancient sages urged you to open may now mean the capacity to focus amid overload, to use awareness deliberately instead of letting it be hijacked. In this sense, the pineal story becomes a manual for the digital age, reclaiming depth in a world of surface. Many contemporary spiritual teachers borrow the symbol to describe inner coherence rather than mystical vision. They speak of aligning brain and heart rhythms, of cultivating presence so complete that insight arises naturally. When you experience such alignment even briefly, you sense why earlier generations described it as light. Clarity feels luminous. Understanding feels expansive. That experience, not anatomy, is the living core of the myth. As the 21st century unfolds, research into consciousness has grown more interdisciplinary. Physicists debate the role of the observer. Neuroscientists map subjective reports onto brain scans. Contemplatives participate in labs as volunteers. It's as if the world is slowly rebuilding the bridge that once connected knowledge and wisdom. Each discovery about the brain's rhythms or the chemistry of sleep becomes a new parable about balance, reminding humanity that illumination without introspection leads to glare, not vision. And so you find yourself at the same crossroad the ancients faced, though the scenery has changed. The temples are made of glass and silicon, not limestone. The priests are researchers in lab coats. The scriptures are datasets. Yet the hunger behind it all remains spiritual, a longing to understand the light behind the light. In the quiet between notifications, you can still feel that longing. It hums like a current beneath the static of modern life, whispering the same question that echoed through pyramids and monasteries. What is seeing, really? Every time you pause long enough to ask it, the inner sun stirs again. You become, for an instant, the experiment and the mystic at once a witness to your own awareness. When you step outside and see the skyline shimmer with glass towers, each window reflecting 1,000,000 tiny suns, you're witnessing humanity's outer vision at its peak. Yet behind all that brightness lies a subtler question: how clear is our inner sight? Every era must decide what it means to see. In ours, seeing often means scrolling, scanning, collecting. But deep beneath the noise, the same impulse that drove temple builders and mystics still moves: the wish to perceive truth without distortion. Contemporary philosophy calls this conscious awareness. You might think of it as a steady beam that can either scatter or focus. When scattered, it creates distraction. When focused, it creates insight, compassion, and art. The symbol of the third eye survives because it expresses that choice more vividly than any equation. It says, there is vision beyond reaction, a way of seeing that transforms what it touches. Modern thinkers have recast the ancient language of awakening in ethical terms. To open the inner eye is to notice the hidden consequences of your own actions, the systems you participate in, the ripple of every purchase, post, or word. In this light, awareness becomes responsibility. It is no longer about mystical powers, but about clarity of participation in a shared world. The more conscious you are, the less likely you are to act blindly. The ancients framed this as enlightenment. Contemporary culture calls it empathy. You can see this shift in movements that emphasize mindfulness in education, healthcare, and leadership. The idea isn't escapism, but engagement training attention so that presence becomes the foundation for choice. Psychologists describe how even brief moments of mindful reflection change the brain's stress circuits, allowing more deliberate responses. Philosophers describe it as cultivating an ethical imagination. The vocabulary differs, but both describe the same mechanism: perception tempered by awareness. Artists translate that mechanism into imagery. In photography and film, the motif of the eye within the lens appears again and again. Cameras turning toward their operators, characters awakening from illusions, protagonists seeing themselves for the first time. In literature, writers describe protagonists who wake up mid-story, realizing they are part of the narrative they thought they observed. These are modern parables of the pineal myth, the moment the observer becomes self-aware. You might recognize that moment in your own life. It's the instant you catch yourself reacting, and instead of continuing automatically, you pause. That pause, small as it seems, is the door the mystics spoke of. Within it lies the possibility of transformation. To cultivate that pause is to polish the inner mirror. In a society that rewards speed, such stillness is quietly radical. Technology, paradoxically, has made the lesson more urgent. We have created machines that extend the senses: satellites, sensors, augmented reality, but each extension demands a counter-movement inward. Without reflection, expansion becomes overwhelm. Some technologists now speak of digital mindfulness, designing pauses into devices, reminding users to look away from screens and breathe. Even in code, the old wisdom resurfaces. Light must alternate with darkness for rhythm to exist. Social movements also draw on the symbol. The image of an open eye appears on posters advocating transparency, justice, and awareness of inequality. The message is collective awakening, seeing what has been unseen. Where ancient initiations aimed at personal transcendence, today's initiations often demand social responsibility, seeing not only one's own consciousness, but the network of lives around it. The inner sun becomes an ethical beacon, illumination that warms rather than blinds. Science adds another layer. Neuroscience now maps empathy and moral decision-making to networks that synchronize when people understand another's perspective. Those patterns light up the same midbrain regions long associated, symbolically, with the third eye. The connection is poetic rather than mystical, yet it underlines a timeless truth. Awareness and compassion arise from the same depth of mind. To see with the heart, as old texts advised, is no longer mere metaphor. It describes a measurable harmony between cognition and emotion. In modern spiritual practice, teachers often emphasize integration over escape. The goal isn't to retreat from the world, but to return to it with clearer eyes. The pineal myth, interpreted this way, becomes a compass for daily life. Keep awareness centered even while engaging with complexity. You might imagine that tiny inner light as a pilot lamp on the dashboard of consciousness, a reminder to steer rather than drift. There's also a creative dimension. Many innovators describe their breakthroughs as flashes of insight that arrive when analysis quiets down. Artists speak of receiving ideas rather than inventing them. In such moments, awareness feels panoramic, unforced, luminous, the very qualities ancient texts ascribe to the opened eye. The pineal symbol survives here as shorthand for creativity's mystery. The sudden union of intuition and intellect. Notice how the story keeps widening. What began as an anatomical curiosity in the skull of each person has become a metaphor for civilization's growing self-awareness. Every scientific discovery, every ethical awakening, every work of art that reveals a new perspective adds another facet to the collective eye. When humanity learns to look at itself without denial, the myth will have fulfilled its purpose. You, as an individual, participate in that unfolding. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you choose understanding over certainty, you enact the myth on a personal scale. The ancients would say the eye opens a little wider. The modern world might call it mindfulness, empathy, or simply maturity. Either way, it is the same inner movement, light meeting consciousness. As you sense that connection between your private reflections and the wider awakening of culture, you begin to see why the symbol endures. It reminds us that awareness is both solitary and shared, that the light shining through one mind can illuminate many. The next segment will explore this collective dimension further, tracing how communities, science, and spirituality together are shaping a new understanding of what it means to see clearly in the 21st century. When you look at the world today, its screens, its headlines, its crowds, you can feel two stories unfolding at once. One is the story of noise, information multiplied until meaning thins. The other is the story of awareness, people, one by one, remembering to breathe, to pause, to question. These two stories coexist like light and shadow, each defining the other. Humanity is standing at that very threshold where the old myth of the pineal gland becomes a mirror for civilization itself. Think of the planet as one vast organism, its billions of humans acting as neurons in a global brain. Our communications pulse like synapses, carrying data across oceans in milliseconds. The digital web we've built is, in a way, the externalization of our inner network. But for all our connectivity, we often miss the simplest link, the connection of shared consciousness. The ancients would call this the awakening of the collective I. The moment a species begins to recognize itself not as separate minds, but as one awareness reflecting through many faces. In psychology, this is described as emergent empathy. When groups meditate together, studies show their brain rhythms can synchronize, creating measurable coherence between individuals. What the mystics called harmony of souls now appears as harmony of waves. It's a quiet reminder that inner states are not private, they ripple outward. The calm of one person can stabilize a room. The anxiety of one can infect a crowd. In that sense, awakening is contagious. You've probably felt it in subtle ways. The serenity that spreads from someone grounded. The clarity that comes from listening instead of reacting. Each of these moments is a transmission of awareness. The old texts might have called it light passing from eye to eye. Today, we call it resonance. And in a world that prizes volume over depth, such resonance is revolutionary. The challenge is scale. The same technology that connects us also fragments us. Algorithms amplify outrage because outrage holds attention. The more we stare into conflict, the less we see of our shared humanity. But within this chaos lies opportunity, the collective longing for presence. Meditation apps, digital retreats, online communities devoted to silence. Paradoxically, the same screens that scatter attention are becoming tools to reclaim it. Perhaps that is how evolution works, by turning every excess into its own cure. Sociologists observe a subtle cultural shift. Younger generations speak more openly about mental health, authenticity, and self-awareness. These are not separate from the pineal myth. They are its modern vocabulary. The conversation has moved from temples and doctrines to therapy and neuroscience, but the essence is unchanged: the desire to awaken. The myth has adapted, wearing new symbols but carrying the same message. See clearly, live consciously. The scientific community, too, is beginning to revisit questions once dismissed as purely spiritual. Researchers studying altered states of consciousness, near-death experiences, and psychedelic therapy often describe encounters with a radiant light or a sense of unity beyond the self. They avoid mystical language, yet their data points to something profound. When the filters of ordinary perception loosen, awareness expands and integrates. The eye opens metaphorically, allowing a broader field of vision. Of course, science can measure patterns, but meaning remains personal. The numbers describe what happens. The story tells why it matters. And this is where you stand, at the intersection of explanation and experience. Every discovery invites interpretation. Every fact invites wonder. You are not required to choose between science and spirituality. The pineal myth whispers that both are reflections in the same mirror. The task is not to pick one side, but to see the whole. Artists sense this integration instinctively. They create works that merge data and dream, interactive installations that translate brainwaves into light, symphonies built from heartbeats, poems coded in algorithms. Each experiment asks the same ancient question: what does consciousness look like from the inside? As creativity embraces complexity, it edges closer to the territory mystics once called illumination. The arts become laboratories of perception, bridging intellect and intuition. Even global crises, climate change, inequality, social unrest carry an undercurrent of awakening. They force awareness outward, compelling humanity to see the consequences of its actions as one interconnected system. The planet itself becomes a living metaphor for the pineal gland, a small vital center whose health determines the balance of the whole. To heal the world, we must first learn to see it whole, not as competing fragments, but as a single, breathing organism. You might wonder where your individual role fits within such vastness. The answer is simpler than it seems. Awareness scales through attention. Every act of presence, every moment of honest perception contributes to the collective clarity. Just as one neuron spark influences a network, your awareness shapes the shared field around you. That's not mysticism. It's physics, psychology, and empathy intertwined. The light in one mind brightens the path for others. This understanding forms the bridge to what comes next. For centuries, the myth of the pineal gland described an eye waiting to open. But in truth, the eye has always been open. It is our attention that blinks. Awakening is not the discovery of a new faculty, but the remembrance of one we've always had. The question then is not how to open it, but how to keep it open amid the distractions of life. In the next section, the story turns inward again. It will explore what it means, in daily life, to live as if the inner eye is awake, to see yourself, others, and the world not as separate, but as reflections of one vast consciousness. You'll trace the journey from knowing about awareness to being awareness itself, from myth to practice, from philosophy to presence. That, ultimately, is the transformation the pineal story has always pointed toward. Not escape, but illumination in the midst of ordinary existence. Pause for a moment. Feel the hum of your own awareness, the simple, undeniable fact that you are here, perceiving. That hum is the thread that connects you to every seeker, every scientist, every poet who ever wondered about the light within. It is the same signal that ancient sages described and modern instruments detect. Whether you call it consciousness, soul, or self-awareness, it is the same mystery, endlessly rediscovered. The outer sun sets, the inner one remains. And as you turn towards section 3, that inner sun begins to rise. You wake before sunrise, and for a moment, the world is still. The light hasn't yet touched the horizon, and the air feels suspended between night and day. In that quiet, you notice something often missed: a subtle awareness that precedes thought. It's not a voice, not even a feeling, but a presence watching from behind your eyes. You've felt it before, though you might not have named it. The ancients called it spirit. Modern thinkers call it consciousness. But whatever word you use, it's the same phenomenon. The awareness that is aware of being aware. That awareness has no edges. When you sit with it, it doesn't belong to you or anyone else. It simply is. The more you rest in it, the more you realize that the boundaries you once thought defined you, body, memory, name, are temporary frames around something infinite. You begin to understand what the old mystics meant when they said, "You are not a drop in the ocean, you are the ocean in a drop." This realization doesn't come as thunder or revelation. It arrives quietly, like dawn through fog, dissolving your certainties rather than replacing them. The world looks the same streets, the same faces, but something subtle has shifted. You no longer see from behind your thoughts, you see through them. Every sound, every color, every sensation feels freshly born. Awareness, once a background, becomes the foreground of your entire existence. You start to notice patterns you missed before, how fear contracts perception, how love expands it, how attention, when pure, transforms the ordinary into the sacred. A single breath becomes an entire landscape. The pulse in your wrist feels like the heartbeat of the world. There's no need for grand philosophies now. Experience itself is enough. The third eye, the mystic spoke of, turns out not to be hidden at all. It's simply the eye that sees without judgment. As you move through your day, this clarity comes and goes. You lose it in distraction, then rediscover it in silence. And that's all right. Awareness is not a state to hold, but a rhythm to remember. Like the pineal gland, responding to cycles of light and dark, your consciousness moves between wakefulness and forgetting. The practice is not to fight the rhythm, but to align with it, to become aware even of unawareness. You begin to see that awakening isn't about reaching some higher realm. It's about inhabiting this one completely. To wash dishes with full attention, to listen without agenda, to walk without rushing, these are not trivial acts. They are ceremonies of perception. Each moment of presence reveals a truth too simple to grasp intellectually. Consciousness is not in you. You are in consciousness. And when you realize that, compassion follows naturally. The wall between self and other thins until it vanishes. The stranger's pain no longer feels distant. The joy of a friend no longer feels separate. You start to understand empathy, not as emotion but as recognition. Every being you meet is another expression of the same awareness looking back through different eyes. In that seeing, judgment melts, replaced by quiet reverence. The more this realization deepens, the more paradoxical it feels. On one hand, everything becomes profoundly intimate. On the other, nothing belongs to you. You act, yet there is no actor. You choose, yet the chooser dissolves into the flow of what's happening. To the analytical mind, this sounds like contradiction, but to lived awareness, it feels like freedom. There's no need to control what already moves in harmony. This freedom is what many traditions call enlightenment, though that word is too grand for something so immediate. It doesn't make you superhuman, it makes you fully human. You still experience sadness, frustration, even anger, but they pass through without defining you. You feel them as weather moving across an open sky, knowing the sky itself is untouched. The light within doesn't eliminate darkness, it renders it transparent. At first, you might try to describe this to others, but words falter. How do you explain that the one who was searching has vanished, yet something vast remains? Eventually, you stop trying to articulate it and begin to live it instead. Your actions, once driven by striving, now emerge from stillness. You find yourself drawn to simplicity, to sincerity over performance, depth over noise. Life, it turns out, doesn't need fixing. It only needs seeing. In that seeing, creativity blooms effortlessly. You might paint, write, or simply walk through a crowded street with a quiet smile. Everything becomes an extension of the same awareness, expressing itself uniquely through you. And because you no longer mistake yourself for the expression, fear fades. You realize that the purpose of existence isn't to achieve or accumulate, but to participate, to let the universe experience itself through your eyes, your hands, your heartbeat. There's a moment maybe while watching sunlight scatter through leaves, maybe while hearing laughter drift across a room when you sense that all of it, absolutely everything, is one continuous gesture of awareness. The cosmos breathes, and you breathe with it. The illusion of separation collapses like a dream dissolving at dawn. What remains isn't some mystical ecstasy. It's a simple, grounded peace, the peace of being what you already are. From this place, even struggle holds meaning. Pain becomes a teacher, not a punishment. Every challenge reveals where attention still clings, where the light has yet to reach. You meet these shadows not with resistance, but curiosity. You understand that the darkness is not the opposite of light, it is its depth. Without it, perception would have no contrast, no form. Awareness embraces both the brilliance and the blur. As your understanding matures, a quiet gratitude fills you. Gratitude not for things, but for existence itself, for the chance to witness, to feel, to know. The ancient texts said that when the inner eye opens, one sees the divine in all. You finally grasp what they meant. Divinity is not a distant being, but the luminous quality of presence itself. Every instant is a revelation, if you are awake enough to see it. And so, you live. Not as a seeker chasing enlightenment, but as awareness, dancing through form. You eat, speak, love, and rest, knowing that behind every experience, the same still light shines. When thoughts arise, you watch them play. When emotions surge, you let them move. The world keeps turning, but you no longer spin with it, you move as it. The difference is subtle, but infinite. There is no finish line to this awakening. It's not something you complete, it's something you continually remember. Like breathing, awareness expands and contracts. Each breath a reminder, you are here, you are alive, you are aware. And in that simple truth, all mysteries resolve. Awareness. Once a private flame, becomes a light you carry into the day. It doesn't announce itself or demand attention. It simply shines through ordinary gestures. You hold a door for someone. You listen fully instead of waiting to speak. You look at a stranger and, without effort, recognize yourself. These are not grand acts of enlightenment. They are the quiet revolutions that rebuild the world from the inside out. The awakening that began as an inner experience starts to express itself as compassion in action. You find that service is no longer obligation, but overflow awareness wanting to meet itself in others. The same intelligence that moves galaxies moves your hands when you help, your voice when you speak truthfully, your silence when you choose peace. Every small kindness becomes a form of prayer, a language through which consciousness celebrates its own reflection. You notice that real transformation doesn't separate you from the world. It binds you to it more deeply. The more awake you become, the more tenderly you feel the pulse of everything alive. You sense the weight of another person's sorrow, the fragility of ecosystems, the quiet endurance of trees. Compassion ceases to be a virtue. It becomes instinct. You realize that love, stripped of sentimentality, is simply clear, seeing the recognition that nothing stands apart. And so your life subtly reorganizes itself. Ambition softens into purpose. Restlessness becomes participation. You begin to act not from desire to prove something, but from the joy of alignment. Work turns into offering, challenges into practice. You see that awakening was never meant to be an escape from the world, but a way of being within it, lucid, present, awake to the shimmering truth that existence is sacred because it is. This shift doesn't make you invincible. You still feel pain, still make mistakes, still face uncertainty. But awareness transforms the relationship with all of it. Fear becomes curiosity. Failure becomes feedback. Endings become openings. You move through life the way light moves through glass, shaped by it, yet unchanged at the core. The world no longer feels like something happening to you. It feels like something happening as you. When storms come, as they always do, you meet them differently. You breathe. You observe. You let the wind pass through without losing center. Even in chaos, the still point remains the same awareness that watched the sunrise now watches the turbulence. You realize this is what the ancient teachings meant by balance. Not avoiding darkness, but knowing the light within it. And slowly, inevitably, that stability begins to influence others. Without preaching, you become a mirror. Your calm becomes contagious. Your presence becomes permission for others to pause. In a world addicted to reaction, stillness is subversive. You discover that leadership isn't about control, it's about coherence, holding a space where others remember their own clarity. This, then, is the real legacy of the pineal myth. Not secret knowledge, but the lived wisdom of awareness embodied. The inner eye was never about hidden powers. It was about seeing reality without distortion. When you live from that seeing, everything becomes transparent. Work becomes meditation, relationship becomes reflection, life itself becomes a ritual of remembrance. You might still feel the tug of old stories, the need to achieve, to possess, to compete. But each time they arise, awareness meets them like an old friend. You smile at their persistence, and in that smile, they dissolve. The world around you may remain complex, even chaotic, but your participation changes. You act with clarity, not compulsion. You speak truthfully, not fearfully. You give without depletion, because what you give is not taken from you, it flows through you. Eventually, you begin to see that awakening is not a destination for a few. It's an evolution for all. Every act of awareness in one person ripples outward, softening conflict, illuminating understanding. It might not make headlines, but it changes everything. You start to understand why the mystics spoke in paradox. To save the world, awaken yourself. To awaken yourself, serve the world. They are the same gesture, seen from two directions. And so your story returns to where it began, the light behind your eyes, the quiet hum of consciousness that was always there. The pineal gland, the myths, the science, the symbols, they were all pointing to this single realization: awareness awakening to itself. The journey ends not with discovery, but with remembrance. You have not become something new. You have remembered what you've always been. Now the task is simple. Live it. Let awareness infuse your choices, your relationships, your work. Let it guide how you listen, how you rest, how you create. You don't have to speak of awakening, you only have to embody it. The world doesn't need more doctrines, it needs more presence. Each moment you meet fully becomes a seed of transformation. Pause for a breath. Feel it move in, move out. That breath is the bridge between the infinite and the finite, between awareness and form. Everything you need to know about life is contained in that rhythm. You are both the breather and the breath, both the witness and the world witnessed. So walk gently, look deeply, act kindly. The light within you is not yours alone, it belongs to everything. The more you let it shine, the more it reveals the same light in others. This is how awakening becomes contagious. This is how awareness evolves. And when you forget, as you will simply begin again, close your eyes, listen to the hum of existence, and remember, the inner sun never sets. It waits behind every thought, every heartbeat, every moment of silence. The practice is only to notice. That is the whole story, and it is happening now through you. If these words stirred something in you, a quiet recognition, a pull toward presence, let that be your signal. Don't rush to share it. Live it first. Take a single day and move through it fully awake, watching each breath, each thought, each encounter as if the universe were seeing through you. Then, if the experience changes you, pass it on not as theory, but as example. Awakening spreads not through persuasion, but through embodiment. Be the presence you seek in others. That is how the inner sun becomes the light of the world.